Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 111. Gift to Cerberus. Cerberus coughed uncontrollably, but his eyes were glued to the fingernail-sized Unity mithril on the table. Just from looking at it alone, he knew that it contained mysteries of the mystic that even he was unfamiliar with. It felt like he was looking at a powerful and ancient relic, something that was lost within the sands of time, and only now did it finally show its face. He was so fascinated by the object that he wasn't even mad about Michael's prank. Cough. What is that? I feel the intensity of the elemental mana imbued in that material itself. Michael wiped the tears off his eyes and stopped laughing. After teasing the Tower Master like this, he deserved to know the truth. He picked up the Unity mithril and threw it to Cerberus, making the white-bearded old man panic and juggle the mithril in the air a couple of times before catching it with his robe. It's something I discovered after visiting the Dwarven Kingdom. According to them, this material is called mithril, Cerberus uttered, finishing Michael's sentence. As a prestigious member of the Guild of Arcana, the organization in charge of everything magic-related in the world, Cerberus was privy to a lot of ancient information about the history of the world and the world before the current era. And if there was one thing missing from today that was prevalent in the ancient days, then it was the presence of mithril. It was written by scholars that mithril was the material that allowed the dwarves to build constructs that turned fiction into reality. But due to some unknown circumstances, the ancient dwarves lost the ability to make mithril forever. So it was true that you persuaded the dwarves to open up their walls to you. I don't know how you were able to do that, but it's even more unbelievable to see that you were able to recreate mithril. The top scholars and wizards in the Guild of Arcana spent the majority of their time researching and experimenting to find ways to recreate mithril, but to no avail. Yet Michael was able to do it. It had only been a year since Cerberus saw Michael, but it seemed that he had already forgotten how much of a monstrous genius the kid was. And perhaps even now he was still underestimating him. But there's something different with this mithril. Why is it glowing with different colors? The records state that mithrils only have one or two colors, Cerberus said as he put the Unity mithril near his eyes. Ah, that's different. You know that I can control all 8 elements, right? Well, I tried putting all of it in one mithril. Ah! Cerberus almost forgot the fact that Michael was a once-in-a-million savant of the mystic arts with multi-elemental mastery over every mana in the natural world. Any mage would be satisfied if they could even get a fraction of Michael's talents in magic. But Michael wasn't even taking his mystic arts studies seriously. It was truly absurd that this wasn't even Michael's greatest talent. He also had a supreme talent and an innovative mind that completely overshadowed his magic. I also have the one-element mithril you were talking about. Michael explained everything he learned about mithril, and how they could improve a magic spell's effectiveness by at least half. Cerberus listened with his eyes almost popping out of his head. Do you know what you have just created? You have solved one of the greatest mysteries that has persisted in the world for thousands of years. You need to visit the Guild of Arcana and show them your discovery. I'm sure that if you tell them everything about mithril, they will give you all the help and resources you will need to study and perfect mithril to the relic it was before. Michael immediately shook his head. Studying for years on end sounded like a complete bore. I'll visit them and give them mithril to study, but I won't be staying there. Or better yet, why don't you study it yourself? He took out a thin rectangular box made out of expensive leather out of his pockets and handed it out to the confused Tower Master. What is this? Cerberus asked. Open it up. Cerberus took the box and lifted the lid, showing a metallic wand, made mostly out of pure Damascus steel. However, there seemed to be a bulbous red glowing gem embedded near the wand's handle. I know you specialize in fire spells, so I made this wand for you with a fire element mithril installed inside. The old man gently picked up the wand from the box and held it in his hands. And immediately, he could feel the energy of the fire mithril resonating with his cores, improving the purity of his mana just from touching this relic alone. Cerberus knew. This was the object that could help him break through to the 9-star realm. I don't know how to thank you. The value of this mithril artifact is not something that I can repay, Cerberus said genuinely. Michael waved off the old man's concern. Don't act like that. We're friends, of course I'm going to give you your own mithril artifact. Cerberus looked at Michael with a thankful gaze. If you really want to repay me, Michael said with a sly smile, then introduce me to the other tower masters in the Queen's region. I'm planning on visiting a lot of magic towers while I'm there, so it would be helpful if you could vouch for me. Cerberus chuckled, finally knowing the reason why Michael gave him a gift. Sure, Cerberus said. I'll tell them to never play chess with you or else they'll get scammed. Ha ha ha. No, but seriously, I'll do more than that. I'll ask them if you could take a look inside their magic libraries. I know you like learning magic spells. This is the least I can do for you since gave me the honor to be one of the only people to receive such a priceless gift. What's with that look? Cerberus asked. Oh, about that. Michael admitted to Cerberus that all of his citizens had their own custom-made mithril artifacts, which amounted to about 5,000 priceless tools and weapons. Chapter 112, Mithril Creation Demonstration. What do you mean you have thousands of mithril artifacts? You mean to tell me you created all of those by yourself? Cerberus asked, calmly. Michael, as usual, shrugged his shoulders. Well, I made the first 1,000 or so. The others were made by my artisans. Cerberus shook his head, as if he had just experienced whiplash. Your artisans? There are other people who can create mithril aside from you. Cerberus thought that Michael was the only one who could create mithril artifacts. After all, he was the only one who had the unique skills and knowledge to make it. Yeah, Michael replied casually. I taught some of my talented citizens how to make mithril themselves. After all, I'm planning on selling artifacts in the future. Unfortunately, their rate of production is still far too slow to be sold in bulk like the automobiles. But we can probably sell some custom-made products if they order from us. The Tower Master didn't know how to feel about this. Michael treated the precious, ancient, and powerful mithril relic as if it were just another one of his innovative products. Scholars and archaeologists treated any piece of mithril relic they found like a national treasure, even if it was broken beyond repair or just a small shard piece. Yet Michael had a complete abundance of it that he was willing to sell some of them as a product of his company. Cerberus could only imagine how they would feel once they knew what Michael was planning. They would surely vomit blood. Some of my artisans are here. Do you want to meet them and see how they make mithril from scratch? Michael asked. The Tower Master could only laugh at the absurdity of the situation. A lot of greedy people would have treated mithril as a secret to be kept even beyond the grave. But Michael had no intention of keeping it for himself. Instead, he wanted to work on making the mithril artifacts accessible to everyone, to where anyone could buy a magical weapon even if they were not magically talented. He strived to create a world where everyone was given the chance to become the best they could be. Many people would have asked Michael why he would want a world where everyone was special. After all, if everyone was special, then no one was. But Cerberus knew Michael well enough to know what his answer was going to be. He just wanted others to be as comfortable as he was. Plain and simple. About an hour later, 5 Rebornians arrived on the steps of the magic tower, garnering a lot of curious looks from the wizards and mages inside. There were 2 ancient dwarfs, a smithing mankey, a metallurgical satyr, and a metalworker troll. These demi-humans were part of the ones Michael deemed to be talented enough to learn mithril, known in the nation of Reborn as the mythical mithril men. Whenever a Rebornian needed a mithril artifact or if they wanted to change their current artifacts, then they would have to request one of them to change it. Michael met them on the first floor and guided them up to the top floor. "Boss, this is a nice tower. It feels good because it's full of mana. Why do humans have such little cores?" Cerberus couldn't help but express his shock once he took a closer look at the demi-humans Michael brought. It was common knowledge that demi-humans were a species that weren't all that adept at magic. Compared to humans who bred talented individuals at a higher rate, demi-humans only had about a 1 in 1,000 chance of producing an individual capable of magic. Not only that, most, if not all demi-human species had no concept of talent awakening at all. This allowed humans to become the superior species when it came to magic, all because of the talent awakening that God gave them. But somehow, these demi-humans showed signs of having immense aptitude in magic, even better than the geniuses in this magic tower. "They have mastery in all elements too?" Cerberus cried out. Michael had to explain his supreme skill and how he was able to impart a fraction of his skills to his allies. At this point, Cerberus wanted to cut ties with the Guild of Arcana and simply become one of Michael's allies for the chance to have the aptitude for all elements. "You are seriously a cheat, you know that?" Michael ignored the old man and asked his artisans to make 5 more mithril wands from scratch. He wanted to give it to the magic tower, mostly because he wanted to repay them for helping him out. Without the magic library, Michael wouldn't have been able to upgrade ChatJK3 to what it was now. "5 wands coming up," they replied. They took out a fingernail-sized sample of Damascus steel and began injecting them with mana. Their faces scrunched up as they concentrated on their work. If they lose focus for even 1 second, then they could end up ruining the entire piece, turning the Damascus steel into a messed-up liquid that lost all its great properties. They had to guide the mana into the gaps in the atoms of the Damascus steel. If they put too little, it wouldn't stick to the material. If they put too much, then it could overload the steel and end up having an explosive reaction. "Just a quick question," Michael whispered to Cerberus while the artisans worked. "Your room has protective spells, right?" Cerberus glared at Michael. "Why? Is it gonna explode?" Michael shrugged. Maybe. Maybe? What do you mean?" Boom! Before he could even complain to Michael, one of the ancient dwarves ended up putting too much fire mana into the Damascus steel, leading to a fiery explosion. Magic circles immediately appeared around the domed room, dissipating the explosive force before it could damage anything. But Cerberus wasn't worried about his room. He was more worried about the dwarf who took that explosion head-on. "Are you okay?" he asked, with his voice slowly faltering as he saw a prismatic shield surrounding each of the demi-humans, negating the effects of the explosion. "Whoa! You failed again? Ha ha ha! That's the 2nd time this week," the satyr teased the dwarf. "Ugh! It's because I'm not used to this place," the dwarf said disappointingly, not even flinching at the explosion. Cerberus watched the demi-humans laugh and tease each other with levity, as if they were used to the explosion, as if they knew that they wouldn't get hurt by it at all. "Michael, that's your absolute unity defense. Don't tell me. They also have an impenetrable shield as a skill?" Chapter 113. Obstacles. Cerberus was absolutely gobsmacked to learn that all 5,000 of Michael's allies had the same impenetrable shield as him. After all, the absolute unity defense that Michael had was something that could defend against any and all kinds of spells. No matter what element it was, as long as it was not stronger than the wielder of the defense, then they wouldn't be affected by any spell. "Yeah, they have it," Michael said matter-of-factly. "But theirs is called the Lesser Unity Defense. It's a bit worse than mine. Since I'm a 4-star mage, any 4-star and below magic spell would not do anything to me. But for them, if they're a 4-star mage, then they can only protect themselves from spells that are 3-star and below." Michael explained it with a bit of a disappointed tone in his voice, as if it wasn't already one of the most powerful defenses in this world. Even the best defensive spells only protected against specific elements. For example, the Turtle Shell Chitin was a defense spell popular among fire mages because it gave them protection against water spells, a natural counter to fire mages. However, that spell had a weakness against earth spells. So, if they wanted to defend against earth spells, then they would have to learn another defensive spell to counter that. Of course, mages couldn't learn too many defensive spells, or else they wouldn't have enough time to learn their offensive spells. So, even the lesser unity defense that Michael was so disappointed by was already something even better than the defenses of high-level mages like Cerberus. It was also a skill, not a spell, which meant that they didn't need any mana to cast their impenetrable defense. It was like a second skin, always present, always protecting them without a limit. Cerberus finally understood why the Dwarven Kingdom allied with Michael. After all, these demi-humans were the non-combative type, yet they were already a force to be reckoned with just by themselves. One would need tremendous amounts of force just to break through their innate defenses. It was a terrifying thought to think of the time when Michael would gather an entire army for himself, each having the ability to deter any magic spells just through their normal defenses alone. They were resistant against all elemental spells while also having the ability to cast any type of elemental spell. His army could charge through a tightly guarded territory and still come out unscathed, all without using any of their spells or other abilities. That was how powerful their defenses were. It was a smart decision for the dwarves to ally themselves with Michael so early on. Cerberus never really put much thought into the nation that Michael built over in the parched lands. But now that he saw a glimpse of their potential, he couldn't help but be glad that he became friends with Michael. It seemed that the rumor was true. Those who obtain a supreme skill would end up ruling the world or changing it entirely. He was thankful that Michael was a good guy. If he had gone the complete opposite route, he could easily lay waste upon this earth if he wanted to. Cerberus shuddered at the thought. A few hours later, the demi-humans finally finished the 5 mithril artifact wands that Michael requested. Each of them had different elements to show its different effects. Cerberus was incredibly curious about their technique, but knew that he or any other mage wouldn't have been able to make mithril even if they knew how to do it. It was a prerequisite for one to have a multi-elemental mastery to create mithril. Cerberus was sure of it after he saw the demi-humans create one from scratch. This meant that only Michael's allies could create mithril because only they had mastery over all elements. Severus wasn't that disappointed with this. Even if he couldn't replicate it, there was still a lot of knowledge hidden within the mithril that he would like to study. Thank you, Michael. With these wands, we can find out more about the mysteries of mithril, Cerberus said as he accepted the wands and placed them in a safe chest. I feel like there's still a lot more we can do with mithril, so it's assuring that we're not the only ones who are trying to study it, Michael replied. He wanted to find more uses for mithril, and having a renowned 8-star mage's insight was a tremendous help. If you get the chance, you must visit the Guild of Arcana. I'm sure that if you present them with a mithril artifact, you will gain their favor, which will be a tremendous help in your endeavors, Cerberus advised. What do you mean? You're planning on expanding your business to the Queen's region, right? Well, you will find a lot more obstacles in spreading your Reborn products there than you did here in the King's region. The Guild of Arcana has a lot of connections, especially in royal and sovereign territories. I'm sure that with their help, you can much more easily establish your company there. Michael knew that expanding into the Queen's region was a lot more troublesome than in the King's region, but he didn't know just how much. Can you tell me more about these obstacles? Michael asked inquisitively. The Queen's region is filled with territories that are not exactly working well together. Some of them are like the Dwarven Kingdom, in that they don't like outside business interfering with theirs, while others are far too crowded with companies and businesses that fully saturate the market. It is not like the King's region, which is considered the rural area of the country. Basically, you'll find a lot more competition in those territories. Even if your products are really good and well-liked by the customers, it won't matter if the lords of that territory refuse to let you sell it in their land. I'm not saying you won't be able to do it. After all, you were able to convince even the stubborn Dwarven Kingdom to ally with you. That is something that not even your grandfather was able to do. However, you'll find it much easier if you have help from the bigger, more established groups in the Queen's region. For example, the Guild of Arcana can help you with establishing yourself in a lot of markets. You could also ally with the Lionheart family, the name famous for their swordsman lineage. They can help deter any unwanted attention. You could also seek help from the Montgomery family, who has political connections with almost every territory in the Queen's region. Or you can even ask your grandfather for some assistance. After all, the Vanderbilt name carries great weight when it comes to all markets. Chapter 114. Observing the City. After speaking with Cerberus, Michael left the magic tower with a lot on his mind. Although the tower master's advice was sound, Michael wasn't planning on seeking the help of any organization for now. He might accept their help if they offered it, but Michael wasn't going to approach them with the intention of asking for their help. That would not be a good basis for cooperation between them. For example, he never approached the Dwarven Kingdom for help. If he did, then the Dwarven King would have immediately refused to talk with him, closing off any future where they could establish a friendship. Instead, he let the Dwarven King approach, letting him see the good intentions of the reborn nation for himself, leading to the two territories becoming allies. This became even more important since he didn't know anything about the Guild of Arcana, the Lionheart family, the Montgomery family, or any other organization in the Queen's region. He didn't know the political landscape, wherein allying himself with one family could end up going against another organization. As for his grandfather, Michael didn't feel the need to ask him for help either. Although he was a Vanderbilt in name, Michael never really felt attached to his surname. He was especially more detached once his grandfather failed to show up at their important meeting about a year ago. Michael didn't want any bigger inheritance from the Vanderbilt wealth. He was incredibly satisfied with inheriting the desolate and useless parched lands. However, Michael thought it would have been nice if his grandfather had taken the time to actually meet with him. Sure, Eyes was a busy man and he probably had a reasonable excuse for being absent, especially since he was in charge of the biggest company in the entire world. But it would have meant a lot for Michael if he had shown up. That was the reason why Michael didn't want to ask for help from his grandfather. He didn't need to anyway. He was confident in Castell and his Reborn products that they could break through the Queen's region market by themselves. Michael walked out of the magic tower and saw that just on the other side of the street, there was a large line of people queuing up at a ticketing booth with the name Reborn Taxi painted in large text on its signage. This was a new business that the Reborn company started, acting just like the taxi services in Michael's previous life. And even though they produced a lot of automobiles for this taxi business, it seemed that the demand for them still far outweighed their supply. There was a very long line that crossed the entire street, filled with people waiting for their turn to hire a Reborn taxi. Michael walked to the end of the line and waited for his turn for an entire hour. Even though Michael could have arrived at Castell's office in a single moment, he decided to go there the normal way. He waited in the Reborn taxi queue just like everybody else. Once it was his turn, he bought a ticket from the booth attendant. "Take me to the Reborn office," Michael said to the satyr in charge of tickets to the automobile taxi service. "Of course," the satyr replied as she led Michael to the lineup of Reborn taxis that patrolled around Kingsbridge City. The foremost automobile opened its doors and let Michael board in its passenger seat. Soon after, the car roared and started its journey through the streets. Throughout the whole ride, Michael kept his eyes on the window, observing everything that was happening in the city after the introduction of the automobile. For example, the novelty of automobiles was still at a high even after a month of its introduction. It became the accepted mode of transportation, especially since it was so fast compared to normal carriages. Of course, since automobiles had taken over the taxi industry, this left the horse carriages out of work. There were barely any of them left in the streets. To remedy this, Michael started a program to give those carriage riders a chance to learn how to drive and to become an employee of the Reborn taxi service. This turned out to be a huge financial success for those drivers since there were a lot of customers who hired their services just to try out the novelty of the automobiles. They could also travel a lot further out of Kingsbridge City without it taking months at a time for every trip, earning them more money in the long run. Michael's driver, for example, was a middle-aged human man who was part of the program. "Sorry for the delay, young man," the driver apologized as he stopped the car to the side. "The roads are still getting worked on, so there's a lot of traffic. But since they're using that magical concrete, it'll be done by tomorrow." The business with concrete was going all right as well. With the rise of automobiles, the entire Kingsbridge road system was currently being reworked to have flat, concrete roads perfect for cars. "Isn't the Reborn company so amazing?" the driver said in admiration. "They're changing our city for the better." Michael smiled, inwardly a little bit embarrassed when hearing such a compliment since the driver had no idea who he was. As the car slowly advanced through the traffic, Michael saw the construction workers pouring concrete on the road. Most of the workers who got their hands dirty were human, while the managers who were overseeing the whole construction project were Rebornians. Michael recognized them to be Kong's loyal students and his employees. The Hobmonkeys inspected the blueprints in their hands, the satyrs instructed the human workers on how to dig the ground better, and the dwarves taught the workers how to properly install the steel reinforcements. "What do you think about the demi-humans?" Michael asked the driver. The middle-aged man looked to the side and saw the demi-humans taking charge of the project like it was normal. Yet in his eyes this was very unusual. "To be honest, I am quite surprised that they're so smart. I would have never thought that they could even cast magic spells." Chapter 115. Demi-Human Landscape. Having demi-humans living in human settlements wasn't exactly weird or unusual, especially in the King's region, which was very close to the parched lands where most demi-humans lived. However, they weren't exactly socially accepted enough to be the norm. Usually, a demi-human would get one weird look or two when crossing the street, but most people would just ignore them and let them go about their day without disturbing them. Most of the demi-humans who migrated to human settlements did so because they thought that they had a chance at a better life there than in the desolate parched lands. Here, they had to offer their services to humans to earn enough money to survive. Most of the jobs they had to do were physical grunt work, such as transporting heavy metals throughout the city, excavating large plots of land, and other mundane jobs. This was about the limit of what most demi-human species could offer. After all, they weren't considered to be capable of complex jobs such as becoming an office clerk or even a skilled craftsman. So, demi-humans were treated as nothing more than muscles, with their worth being valued through their physical capacity alone. But ever since the Reborn company appeared, the landscape for demi-humans in the human world had quickly changed. Suddenly, demi-humans appeared who could speak in perfect human language, with their words being complex and indistinguishable from a normal human. Not only that, they all seemed to be capable of magic as well. This surprised most people because they never thought demi-humans were capable of casting 3-star spells and above. There was one incident the day after the automobile was introduced where the engineer Hobmonkeys displayed their talents by casting a 3-star spell in front of hundreds of spectators. They bent the earth to their will, creating a large crevice in the ground in just a matter of a few seconds. Then, they conjured a visual 3D projection of a finished gas station in the empty spot, making it easy for the workers to follow the blueprints down to the very small details. They took control of the project and made it as efficient as possible, showing their mastery over this kind of job even better than veteran human construction workers. The demi-humans also showed powerful talent in magic, with a deep well of complex knowledge that was even better than the current human standards. This completely overturned the initial perception people had of demi-humans. People thought they were just simple creatures like animals that gained sentience and could only speak the bare minimum of the human language. But what they showed that day put them on the very same level as humans, both having the capacity for higher and more complex thinking. As more demi-humans came to take control of the Reborn businesses all over the region, it became more and more widespread throughout the days. Suddenly, it became normal to see a lamia selling fish in the wet market, haggling and bargaining with the customers. It became normal to see a very intimidating centaur patrolling the Reborn offices to keep it safe through the night. It became normal to see satyrs driving around the streets in large trucks carrying supplies and shipments for the company. It also didn't take long for people to realize that these demi-humans were incredibly talented individuals, each being extremely good at their jobs. For example, the Reborn company delved into the vegetation business, selling their excess crops and harvest yields to every market in the King's region. And it was clear from the get-go that their harvests were much bigger than normal. Their carrots were more orange and a lot longer, their cabbages were a lot leafier, and they were even selling crops that were completely out of season. It was clear that the demi-humans of Reborn were on a whole different level. They were even a lot wealthier than people even realized. There were a lot of Hobmonkeys, satyrs, and dwarves who chose to buy their own house and lot in the city because they were going to stay here for a while to finish up their projects. They bought properties in the middle of the city itself despite its high prices. It must be mentioned that Kingsbridge was considered a wealthy city, with rich and affluent citizens dwelling inside. But even then, the demi-humans of Reborn did not fall behind in terms of pure purchasing power. Every one of them seemed to be capable of throwing gold coins away like it was nothing. After all, Michael was not stringent in giving them gold coins. They worked hard for it. Their stipends were thousands upon thousands of gold coins, giving them enough to live lavishly in the city for a long time. And the reason why these demi-humans obtained the reputation of being gold throwers was because they didn't care much about saving money. After all, they had everything they wanted waiting for them back at home. "I don't know if this is true," Michael's driver whispered, "but I heard that all the demi-humans that appeared are from their own country in the parched lands." Of course, people eventually found out that they all came from the nation of Reborn. However, it wasn't that widespread yet because people still believed that the parched lands had no capacity to become prosperous enough to have a nation for itself. Though most people were starting to find out the truth. After all, they could easily verify the truth by going there themselves. A couple of minutes later, Michael finally arrived at the Reborn office. He flicked a gold coin at the driver as a tip, who eagerly thanked him for his generosity. Once he left the car, he was immediately met with another long line in front of the Reborn building. But this time, the line wasn't made up of people, but of demi-humans. Ever since the rumor about the nation of Reborn spread across the King's region, there were more and more demi-humans who sought to join them and hopefully become as prosperous as the talented demi-humans from Reborn. They left the parched lands in search of a better life. But they would have never thought that a better life was waiting for them back in the parched lands. Chapter 116. Spending Spree. "Young master, you're here." Castell perked up once she saw Michael approach the building. Even the rest of the employees who were familiar with Michael had smiles on their faces as they saw him. "It's good to see you, Castell," Michael waved back. "Boss, I hope we spread baseball here soon. I'm itching to play. How about we play a little game later today?" Kong said, who was right next to Castell. He was busy designing more buildings for the Reborn company, so he frequently visited the office. "Improve your game first. I hope you can finally beat me next time," Michael replied to Kong teasingly, to which the hobmonkey clicked his tongue in disappointment. "Beer is good here, but it's still better cold. Boss, when are we going to line this city with electricity?" Beside Kong was Thrain, who became the supervisor of all dwarves that worked in this city. Judging from the lack of red tint in his cheeks, it looked like the old dwarf hadn't gotten his daily dose of beer as of yet. "Boss, let's play a game of chess next time. When we return to our nation, we're going to take a swim in the river, boss. Join us." "Boss, I miss the hot springs we have back in our nation." Michael greeted all the Rebornians in the office building, and they greeted him with respect and positivity in turn. The local demi-humans who were lined up watched this whole interaction with surprise and confusion filling their eyes. When they first saw Kong, they witnessed how he bent straight metal bars into the foundation of a house in just mere seconds. When they first saw Thrain, they saw him breathe fire out of his mouth to melt steel into something that could be molded into a different shape. When they first saw the evolved and talented demi-humans, they looked like individuals who answered to no one. In short, when they saw the demi-humans of Reborn, they saw figures with great strength and great power superior to even the best of humans. However, when they faced this small human child with golden hair, they all seemed to naturally gravitate towards him, treating him with care and respect despite his age and species. They could see nothing but admiration in their eyes whenever they looked at Michael. It made them wonder who this mysterious human boy was. "Hey, how are you guys feeling?" Michael asked the local demi-humans. After having lived in human settlements for their whole lives, these demi-humans weren't used to a human boy approaching and talking to them with a friendly smile. More often than not, parents would always hide their kids whenever they were in their presence. "It's okay, he's our boss. He's the one who helped us become who we are now," Kong said to the meek demi-humans. "He's a harmless cutie," said a female hobmonkey, taking Michael and embracing his head with her bosom. Despite their words, they were still a little bit hesitant to shake hands with Michael. They were still afraid that they would get in trouble for touching a human. Michael understood their feelings, so to break the ice, he decided to treat them to a spending spree. "Follow me," he said to the demi-humans. Kong and the other Rebornians had to push the demi-humans to follow Michael, but they eventually started walking behind him voluntarily. Since this was in the middle of the city, this whole block of area was filled with a lot of active markets that sold everything from fresh produce to meat skewers to candied treats for everyone to enjoy. Michael and the huge group of demi-humans only had to walk to the next street over before they reached the lively market crowded with a lot of people. The demi-humans huddled together in one group, afraid to separate from each other since they were knee-deep into human territory. They didn't frequent this place because it was for wealthy humans only, and the prices here were not something they could afford. Despite that, they couldn't help but eye the mouth-watering chicken skewers and candied apples displayed all over the booths. Even the children couldn't help but drool, once they saw human children joyfully eating the treats their mothers bought for them. Michael walked to the skewer stall owner and spoke to him for a second, with the attendant showing a look of surprise before nodding his head enthusiastically. Michael took out a big purse, loaded with gold coins, and gave it to the owner. Once he received the payment, the owner excitedly took out the skewers in his stall and began giving it to the demi-humans. But of course, the demi-humans were confused and even pushed away the meat skewers in fear that they would have to pay a lot of money for it. Michael turned to the demi-humans and said, "What are you waiting for? You can have anything you want from here. I already paid for everything." The demi-humans looked at Michael with a dumbfounded look. Finally, one of the Mankey children accepted one of the beef skewers and took a big bite. Immediately, the rich taste of the meat filled the child with joy, making him jump up and down out of happiness. "Delicious?" Michael asked. "Yes," the child replied, not taking his eyes off the skewers. "You can have anything you like. Do you want that candied apple too? Take as much as you want." Seeing the kid eating his fill, the other demi-humans finally took the rest of the meat skewers on the stall and began eating to their heart's desire. Kong and the other Rebornians were a bit emotional as they watched this scene. The things that were normal for them, like an abundance of food and water, was something that was only a dream for most demi-humans living in this world. Smiles filled the demi-humans' faces as they indulged in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Of course, they didn't know that if they joined the nation of Reborn, they could have this paradise every day for as long as they wanted. Chapter 117. Spontaneous Feast. Michael was like an endless pocket of money as he kept bringing out pouches full of gold and buying out everything available in the stalls. The attendants quickly agreed to keep supplying more and more food for everyone to enjoy. After all, the money Michael gave them far exceeded the cost of their entire selection of merchandise. So, the stall owners kept frying skewers in their coal grill and happily gave out the cooked meat to anyone who needed it. Of course, he didn't limit the festivities to only demi-humans. He invited all the citizens of Kingsbridge City to partake in this feast, giving them everything in the stalls for free. It soon became a huge party as more and more people caught wind of the free food being given out to anyone who wanted to eat. After half an hour, the whole market was filled with both humans and demi-humans alike enjoying themselves with an endless buffet of amazing food and nourishment. There were actually too many people going in that the stalls eventually ran out of meat. To remedy this, Michael instructed Castell to buy more ingredients and bring them in so that more people could be fed. In the end, Michael had to cook and grill skewers himself just to keep the supply of food going out. It was all worth it though. Michael saw human and demi-human children enjoying their food together without any discrimination or inequality between them. They all laughed as a kid got their cheeks stained with sauce, or cheered as a yellow Mankey child showed off his unique ability to stand only using his tail. The friendship between the different species of kids continued as Michael brought out a new wooden toy called the spinning top. The Rebornians showed off their magical powers, as they created intricately designed spinning tops out of wooden blocks in just a matter of a few seconds. The children were immediately fascinated with the toy and began to play with each other. Meanwhile, the adults enjoyed themselves as the Reborn company supplied cold draft beer to the market. The Rebornians taught the humans how to drink beer properly, sharing stories and greetings in the meanwhile. The demi-humans partook in this as well, and on this joyous occasion, they found out that the humans treated them the same as other humans. This was probably the first time demi-humans and humans talked to each other without any pretense and simply enjoyed each other's company. As more and more people heard about this spontaneous event, they began to wonder how it all began in the first place. All the people asking were pointed towards one boy, whose hair was golden, eyes kind, and a smile that infected everyone that saw him. That boy paid for everything here? Oh my! Who is he? How can he afford such lavishness? It doesn't matter how rich he is, what matters is that he's giving away food for free. Newspaper journalists immediately asked around the stall owners, and quickly found out that everything was bought and paid for by none other than Michael Vanderbilt, the youngest son of the wealthiest family in the entire world. Although they knew that his family was extremely wealthy, they would have never thought that he would essentially give away free money on such an ordinary day. Not only that, people observed that all the special and talented demi-humans seemed to be close with Michael, as if he had a personal connection with them. Hey, I heard a rumor. I don't know if it's true. What is it? Some say that it's this young kid that owns the Reborn company. What? The Reborn that sells faucets and automobile cars? The company that earns millions and millions of gold every month? That company is owned by this kid. Although Michael never hid the fact that he was the owner of Reborn, he never did anything to advertise it either. When he visited the Reborn office, most people thought that he was just another customer who wanted to buy a lot of stuff from the Reborn. After all, he was a wealthy kid. Never in a million years would they have thought that he was the one who started this whole operation and that all of the products being sold were his ideas. But that doesn't make sense. He's a Vanderbilt, right? Why didn't he just use his family's company to sell his products? It was also common knowledge in the King's region that the Reborn company had toppled the Vanderbilt business in this area of the country. They quickly took over every business in the King's region, leaving the Vanderbilt company to partially withdraw from the King's region. For other people, it didn't make sense why Michael would compete against his family's business. Don't you know? The legendary Eyes Vanderbilt announced that the entire wealth of his company and his name would be given to his chosen successor. They say that anyone with a Vanderbilt name can inherit all his riches as long as they prove themselves worthy. It's not just decided through seniority. Maybe Michael Vanderbilt is trying to lay claim that he is worthy of inheriting his grandfather's wealth by creating a company from the ground up. As soon as that rumor began circulating, more and more people started to believe it. Although they were close to the truth, it wasn't exactly right. Michael built the Reborn company just because he wanted to, not because he wanted to fight for the inheritance like others said. If that's true, then I think he can become the successor. Look at what he's done with the Reborn company. In just a few years, he was able to build a company that spread to the entire King's region. Given more time, surely he will be able to conquer the entire country with his innovative products. After the journalists did a little more digging, they quickly got confirmation from the CEO of Reborn herself, Castell, that Michael was indeed the true owner of Reborn. When a few journalists approached Michael and asked him if it was true, his answer was a simple, "Yeah, I own Reborn," with his signature shrug of the shoulders. The next day, the headline of every newspaper in Kingsbridge City was, "Genius son of Vanderbilt family owns Reborn company?"
Chapter 118. Genius son owns Reborn.
As the citizens of Kingsbridge City woke up the next morning, the first thing they read in the newspaper was the revelation of a mystery that had been nagging on their minds for the past 5 years. Who owned Reborn? Back then, there were rumors of it being a wizard, a hermit, or an overseas mogul. And as it turned out, they were all wrong. Michael owned Reborn. This announcement sent waves of shock through everyone in the whole city, each of them expressing their disbelief upon finding out that it was only a child who brought them the magnificent cars and faucets. The products sold by Reborn were so clever and far ahead of their time that many people found it hard to believe that an 11-year-old child came up with them. However, the evidence presented in the newspapers told the entire history of how the Reborn company started, and how it came to become what it was now. It started when Michael invented soap and how it snowballed into a corporation that earned millions and millions of gold coins per month. Many were impressed with Michael's ingenuity and his insight into creating such a booming business. However, many more were surprised to find out that not only was Michael smart, but he was incredibly talented in magic as well. According to official sources, the Magic Tower once offered Michael the opportunity to become the Tower Master's personal student, an honor given only to those who had the talent to become a 7-star mage and above. The Vanderbilt family has truly produced a one-of-a-kind descendant. It is truly insane how he has the talent to become a gifted wizard and a brilliant entrepreneur as well. Save some for the rest of us, kid. And did you hear? The kid was also able to make the desolate parched lands into a prosperous territory. It was also mentioned in the newspapers that Michael started his own country in the parched lands called the Nation of Reborn. That was where all the talented demihumans like Kong and Thrain came from, and where they manufactured the automobiles that were being sold today. This sparked a lot of curious people to journey to the parched lands to verify the truth. After all, there were quite a number of unbelievable stories written in there, such as the abundance of food and water, the presence of lightning bulbs, and a stadium made only for a game called baseball. Thankfully for them, there was a very convenient Reborn bus ride that they could use that would take them straight to the Nation of Reborn in less than a week. After they returned, there was nothing but praise and commendation for the Nation of Reborn. Many people described what they saw as a literal paradise, with stars landing on the ground at night to grace the nation with light. Of course, they were talking about electricity, but most people had no idea what it was yet. And perhaps what they mentioned the most were the demihumans living in the Nation of Reborn. They were all talented and gifted in their own ways, contributing their specialties to the nation in one way or another. People thought that the Rebornians in the city were a special group of demihumans, the one-in-a-million type of geniuses. But as it turned out, they weren't much different than the 5,000 other citizens staying in the parched lands. After hearing this, the local demihumans no longer hesitated to join the Nation of Reborn, and soon after, they immediately received the benefits of becoming a Rebornian. They were given a chance to evolve and gain new skills from Michael, which he gladly made time for. After their evolution, they gained so much more confidence and self-esteem within themselves once they found their innate talents. They worked a lot better, they became a lot quicker in thinking, and they were even capable of using unique skills that no one had ever seen before. This sparked a lot of change within Kingsbridge City, where humans began to accept demihumans as an equal species. Of course, this was helped by the Reborn company advocating for demihumans to be treated just like humans without any discrimination. They had a lot of programs to have humans and demihumans interacting for a chance to dissolve any prejudice one had for the other. There were festivals, gatherings, and friendly competitions that mix both humans and demihumans together. Due to the positive reputation of the company, especially with the festivities in the market, many people washed away any biases and negative preconceived notions they had of demihumans. This generally led to a more harmonious living between the two different species. Humans in the King's region became so much more open-minded about demihumans that Michael deemed that it was finally time for the next phase of his plan. He decided to allow passage from the Dwarven Kingdom to the Queen's region. He and the Dwarven King had talked about this for some time now, and they both decided to let people cross the Dwarven Kingdom so that they could circumvent the rough terrain of the mountain ranges between the Queen's and King's region. People no longer had to go through the perilous mountain ranges to reach the Queen's region. It would work just like a highway toll back in Michael's previous world. People would pay a certain fee to enter the road connecting the King's region and the Queen's region through the Dwarven Kingdom. They also had to use a Reborn automobile to be allowed entry into this highway. Of course, the profits would be shared between the two territories equally, since the road would be trespassing in Dwarven territory, while Michael bore all the costs of maintaining and creating the road itself. Michael would have wanted to create a railway system to connect there, but he first needed the cooperation of the territory on the other side in the Queen's region. In the future, he would have railway systems connecting every territory from Kingsbridge to the Nation of Reborn to the Dwarven Kingdom, and then to the Queen's region. But for now, a flat concrete road would suffice. This highway system would allow quicker and safer travel to other regions, not only for normal people, but for businesses as well. They could transport heavier products to the other side of the country much easier. Most of all, Michael would finally be able to start spreading the Reborn company to the rest of the country. Chapter 119. Komodos. Just beyond the infamous mountain ranges that separated the two regions, was a group of scaled demi-humans who looked up at the steep cliffs ahead of them. These demi-humans walked on two legs and had tough snake-like scales all over their bodies. Their heads looked more like lizards than it did humans, with them having no hair and a mostly bulbous skull. Their species were called Komodos, having above-average intellect with opposable thumbs like humans, allowing them to do easy jobs such as cashiers, attendants, or even clerks. However, that was all they could achieve. They weren't like the dwarves who had their own kingdom and were extremely adept at making crafts. They weren't like the elves whose magic capacity trumped even that of talented humans. They weren't like orcs who boasted tremendous strength and physical prowess. They were mediocre at best. They were just good enough. They were just like normal humans who couldn't use magic, except for the fact that they needed a lot more maintenance to survive. This meant that they had to buy a lot more food and water than most, which was hard since the jobs they were qualified for only gave them salaries that were just shy of what they needed to live. There were higher salaries in the larger and wealthier parts of the Queen's region, but the competition was much more fierce there. Not only that, but the cost of food was much higher too. So it didn't matter in the end. Finally, this group of Komodos finally had enough. They decided to move out of the Queen's region and return to their ancestors' home, the parched lands. Their fellow workers, their friends, their neighbors, and even other Komodos tried to dissuade them from their decision. After all, they could end up dying out of hunger and thirst in that desolate land, especially since their skin needed a lot of hydration. Of course, the news about the nation of Reborn wasn't known yet in these parts. But even without knowing about it, this family of Komodos wanted to take the risk. Even if they thought that the parched lands had no abundance of food or water, they wanted to go back to their homeland to try and find their source of pride. After all, their ancestors were once a proud species of demi-humans, famous for being closely related to the strongest and mightiest race in this whole world. Back in the day, the Komodo species were part of the draconian race. They were dragons. But after millennia of being separated from the other dragon races, the Komodos had strayed far away from their original bloodline. They had lost their power. They had turned into a species with little to no magical aptitude, and no domineering physical strength, and even their scales had become so vulnerable that they would succumb to heat. It was hard to imagine they were part of the famous draconian race whose scales were the hardest material in the world. But they were. At least, their ancestors were. This young family of Komodos wanted to find a way to get back to their species' old glory. It may be a futile effort, but they couldn't stand to live in mediocrity any longer. So, they traveled by foot day and night until they finally arrived at the mountain ranges. The steep and slippery cliffside edges of the mountains were already a sign that this would be a hard trek, but they were willing to brave the risks. But just as they were about to climb up the mountain, they were suddenly stopped by a few humans wearing full steel armor. "Excuse me, fellow men, where are you guys going?" the guard asked. One of the Komodos, an adolescent male, stepped up and talked to the guards. "We want to climb the mountain and go back to our homeland," he said. The guards looked at the group of Komodos and saw that there were about 8 of them in the whole group. "Where's your papers?" the guard asked them. The Komodos all looked at each other, confused as to what the guard was talking about. "If you want to cross to the next region, we need to see your identification papers," the guard reiterated. The Komodos were not rich. They had barely scraped by in the Queen's region, and sometimes even scavenged for food to survive. They considered themselves lucky if they found chicken bones or moldy bread in the trash. Identification papers were only available to those who were permanent residents of a territory, meaning those people who bought a house of their own. The Komodos were basically homeless, which meant that they didn't have any identification papers. Their parents and their parents' parents wouldn't have one either. "We don't have any paper," the male Komodo answered politely, hoping that the guard would let them through. The guard pursed his lips. It was clear that he was pitying the Komodos, but there was nothing he could do. It was policy for them to refuse any entry into the king's region without proper identification. "I'm sorry, but if you don't have any identification, I can't let you pass. And if you try to enter despite my warnings, then I am obligated to use violent force to stop you," The Komodos' faces turned into one of disappointment and dismay. They spent their entire wealth trying to get here to this point. If they ended up going back to where they came from, they would be essentially worse than when they left. They wouldn't have food or water to survive. Please, sir, can't you just make an exception for us? Is there anything we can do? We are desperate. This is our last chance. In their desperation, they kneeled to the ground and begged. But despite their pleas, the guard was steadfast. As much as they would like to help them out, he needed to watch out for himself. He would be committing a crime if he let them pass through without proper identification. What's going on here? Just then, a woman's voice entered the scene. Chapter 120, Montgomery. What's going on here? This voice came from a very young woman, about 10 years old, as she slowly got off her ornately designed carriage and approached the prostrating Komodos. Everyone turned to look at her. She had long flowing black hair, round black eyes, and red pursed lips that showed concern for the demi-humans. She walked towards them with grace and aplomb. If she had a book on her head, it wouldn't fall out even as she walked on rocky terrain. It wouldn't even wiggle. If that wasn't enough to ascertain this young lady's background, then her personal effects certainly would. Her dress was made out of very expensive red silk, and fine linen adorned with gemstones around the hems of her garments. The carriage was also something that the Komodos only saw royals use extensively. Not only that, there was a whole fleet of supporting carriages behind her which was clearly there to escort this young lady to wherever she planned to go. Young miss, we are simply here to do our jobs. These demi-humans want to cross the mountain ranges, but they do not have any identification papers, the guard said, his tone a little bit more respectful. He recognized that she seemed to be from a more affluent family. The young woman looked at the Komodos. Is this true? She asked them. They shied away from her gaze. As peasants, this was perhaps the first time they were this close to someone who looked like she was of noble birth. Yes, it's true, they said. We are nomads with no home to stay. We don't have any papers to show our identity. But we just want to go to the parched lands and return to our homeland. The girl took a deep breath. She had always hated the identification paper policy in this country. It always discriminated against the demi-humans who weren't socially accepted into society. She kneeled to the ground and leveled eye to eye with the Komodos, never minding the fact that her dress would be dirted by the dirt and dust on the ground. The Komodos looked at the young girl, surprised as she lowered herself to their level. She didn't have to do that. It was clear that she was from a wealthy and affluent background, yet she wasn't snobby or elitist. She looked the Komodos in the eyes and was unafraid to get close to them. Do you want to join me? My friends and I are journeying to the King's region as well. We have some spare room in our carriages, she said as she took off her gloves and offered her hand to them. The Komodos looked at each other, a little bit confused and apprehensive. Don't worry, you won't be alone, the young girl said as she pointed at the carriages behind her. The doors opened as demi-humans of all kinds and varieties walked out of the carriages and proudly showed themselves to the world. Surprisingly, the girls seemed to be escorted by a variety of demi-humans wearing expensive tunics and shirts. They had confident smiles on their faces, as if they never experienced the hardships that most demi-humans faced in the Queen's region. These are my escorts, the young girl said. As you can see, I don't discriminate against demi-humans. I advocate for them. The Komodos were amazed at seeing other demi-human species riding in their own carriages. They seemed dignified and proud to be demi-humans, unlike the Komodos who had lost all pride for their own species. But what about? The Komodos said, meekly looking over to the guards. Young miss, even if you take these demi-humans, they still cannot cross over to the King's region. They don't have their identification papers, the guard said. Just then, another guard suddenly noticed the emblem on the young girl's carriage. It showed the depiction of a constellation of stars in the night sky. That's the insignia of the Montgomery family, he shouted. Her black hair, distinguished looks, and her demi-human escorts. This young girl must be Una, the youngest daughter of the Montgomery family. Upon hearing this, the original guard realized his mistake and quickly changed his attitude, standing on guard and not daring to look like he was slouching. I apologize. I didn't know what I was saying. You can proceed as you please. The Montgomery family was famous for their diplomatic connections within the entire country. They were the people responsible for mediating any conflict in all regions, settling any debates as an unbiased third party. Because of the nature of their job, the Montgomery family had diplomatic immunity. After all, to mediate conflict between two territories, they needed to visit these places without any obstruction, or else they wouldn't be able to do their job. Fortunately, the benefits of diplomatic immunity meant that things like identification papers were not a problem for the young girl. Since the Komodos were now part of Yuna's escorts, they were now an extension of herself. If the guard denied them entry, then they would essentially be denying Yuna's entry as well. By doing so, the guard would commit a crime equivalent to treason. So they quickly dispersed, afraid that they would get into more trouble. See? There's no problem. You can cross the mountains with us? Yuna said with a smile. The Komodos were amazed. They had never seen a guard act like this just because they heard someone's last name. They thanked you. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.